Hi everyone, I'm your host Freya, and this is U.S. Government Explained, the podcast where we break down the American political system in clear, simple English. In our last episode, we explored the United States Congress and how the legislative branch makes the laws that shape daily life. Today, we're turning to the second branch of the federal government, the executive branch, led by the President of the United States. We'll talk about where presidential power comes from, how it has changed over time, what the president actually does, who supports the president, and how the executive branch fits into the larger system of checks and balances. The presidency is created in Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution. Congress got the first, longest article, but Article 2 is still incredibly powerful. It establishes the presidential qualifications. The president must be 35 years old, born a U.S. citizen, and at least 14 years of residency in the United States. The length of the term is 4 years. It also establishes the structure of the Electoral College, and it describes the oath of office, which every president recites on Inauguration Day. The Constitution also describes what the president is supposed to do. These roles include Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, Chief Executive responsible for enforcing federal laws, Chief Diplomat guiding foreign policy, Head of State representing the nation symbolically and ceremonially, and legislative participant able to sign or veto laws. Some of these roles are written directly into the Constitution, others evolved over time as the presidency became more complex. Now, you might know this, but the president is not chosen by a national popular vote. Instead, the Constitution creates the Electoral College, where each state receives a number of electors equal to its number of members in Congress. Today, almost every state uses a winner-take-all system. Whichever candidate wins the popular vote in that state receives all of its electoral votes. This structure reflects the founders' desire to balance influence between small and large states. It is also one of the most debated parts of American elections today, especially in years when the winner of the Electoral College did not win the national popular vote. Let's take a closer look at what the president actually does. First, the president enforces laws. This is perhaps the most important job of the executive branch. It has to carry out the laws passed by Congress. This is done through dozens of departments and agencies. Every federal worker, from diplomats to park rangers to tax administrators, ultimately falls under the executive branch. The president is also known as the Commander-in-Chief. This person controls military operations, but only Congress can declare war. This creates an important balance between the two branches. However, in real history, especially more recently, many presidents have used military power without a formal declaration of war. For example, President Harry Truman in the Korean War, or President Lyndon Johnson in Vietnam, or more recent administrations in Iraq and Afghanistan. Congress did pass the War Powers Resolution in 1973 to limit unilateral presidential action, or the idea of presidents taking military action without the approval of Congress, though presidents still debate its restrictions. The president is also the foreign policy leader. They are supposed to negotiate treaties and represent the U.S. abroad. Presidents often become some of the most globally recognized figures. For example, Woodrow Wilson tried to reshape global diplomacy after World War I. Richard Nixon opened diplomatic relations with China, and Ronald Reagan engaged in major Cold War negotiations with the Soviet Union. In terms of legislative power, while the president cannot write laws, the president is able to sign bills into law, signaling approval. The president can also veto bills, which means they refuse to sign a bill into law. And the president can propose legislation. And the president gives the annual State of the Union address to guide Congress. Many major laws in U.S. history were heavily shaped by presidents, like Lincoln, Franklin Roosevelt, Lyndon Johnson, and others. And even though the Constitution outlines presidential powers, the actual role has changed dramatically over U.S. history. 3 presidents especially illustrate how crises expanded the office. Take Abraham Lincoln, for example. During the Civil War, Lincoln used presidential power in ways no previous president had. He suspended habeas corpus, allowing the government to detain people suspected of aiding the Confederacy. He issued the Emancipation Proclamation, a military order that reshaped the war and American society by granting freedom to enslaved people. And he directed wartime strategy personally. Many of these actions were controversial, but the crisis of the Civil War pushed the presidency into a more active, direct role. Additionally, let's look at Franklin Delano Roosevelt. FDR, as he's also known, expanded presidential leadership in 2 major ways. Through the New Deal, which was a sweeping set of economic programs and regulations that helped the country get through the Great Depression, and his leadership of the nation through World War II. He communicated directly with the public through his famous fireside chats over the radio, and built an administrative state that still influences the government today. Our third and final example is George W. Bush. After the 9/11 attacks, presidential power grew again. The Department of Homeland Security was created. The government also expanded surveillance and intelligence gathering. And Bush authorized the use of military action in Afghanistan and Iraq. These actions shaped national security policy in the decades since then and sparked major public debates about presidential power. Now, the president does not work alone. The executive branch is massive, and leading it requires a team of advisors and experts. The top group is called the cabinet. The cabinet includes the heads of major federal departments. Some of the most important include the Department of State, which handles foreign policy. The Department of Defense oversees the military. Department of the Treasury manages national finances. Department of Homeland Security protects the country from internal and external threats. The Department of Justice is led by the Attorney General and oversees law enforcement. The Department of Education sets national education priorities and standards and gives out federal aid to schools throughout the country. The Department of Health and Human Services oversees public health programs. The Department of Transportation manages national infrastructure. And the Department of the Interior manages national parks and federal lands. There are 15 cabinet departments in total. While the president appoints the secretaries, the Senate must confirm them. Another example of checks and balances. Beyond the cabinet, the executive branch includes independent agencies like NASA, regulatory commissions like the Federal Communications Commission, or FCC, and thousands of civil servants who keep the government running each day. Finally, there's another pretty big role in the executive branch, and that's the vice president. The vice president of the U.S. is often described as being a heartbeat away from the presidency, And that's because their most important constitutional role is succession. If the president dies, resigns, or is removed from office, the vice president immediately becomes president. This has happened 9 times in American history. But the vice president has several other important responsibilities. First, the vice president serves as the president of the Senate. They don't debate or vote like normal senators, but they can cast a tie-breaking vote when the Senate is deadlocked. In recent years, with closely divided chambers, vice presidents have played a major role in passing or blocking legislation. Second, the vice president is a key member of the executive branch. Modern presidents rely on their vice presidents as advisors, envoys, and partners in policy. They may represent the U.S. abroad, lead special task forces, or help negotiate with Congress. This expanded role isn't written in the Constitution. It developed over time as the presidency itself grew more complex. Finally, the vice president is an important symbol of the administration. Because presidents choose running mates carefully, the vice president often reflects political balance, regional diversity, or specific expertise the president wants to highlight. In short, the vice president is both a constitutional officer and a political partner, someone who stands ready to lead the nation while also helping the administration govern day to day. Even though the president is often seen as the most powerful public figure in the United States, the Constitution places strict limits. Congress can override vetoes, control funding, and impeach a president. The Supreme Court can declare presidential actions unconstitutional. Elections every 4 years ensure public accountability. And the 22nd Amendment limits presidents to 2 terms. Presidents who exceeded constitutional boundaries have often been checked by courts or Congress. For example, the Supreme Court ruled against President Truman when he tried to seize steel mills during the Korean War. To help you get a better picture of presidential power, let's look at a few key moments from U.S. history describing what presidents can actually do. Through the Louisiana Purchase, President Thomas Jefferson doubled the size of the U.S. by purchasing territory from a financially struggling France, even though the Constitution did not clearly allow such a move. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, President John F. Kennedy navigated the world's closest moment to nuclear war through diplomacy. In the 1960s, President Lyndon Johnson worked with Congress to pass landmark civil rights and social programs, which were termed the Great Society. And the current president has made major changes through executive orders, illustrating how presidents today often rely on executive action when Congress is divided or unwilling to go along with a president's agenda. So why does the presidency matter today? Well, the presidency has a huge impact on foreign relations, national security, the economy, environmental policy, judicial appointments, emergency response, public communication, and the overall direction of the country. Because the president is a single, highly visible figure, Americans often focus more on presidential politics than the details of Congress, even though both branches hold immense power. That's all for today's episode. I'm your host, Freya, and this has been U.S. Government Explained. In our next episode, we'll continue building our understanding of the federal government by turning to the judicial branch and the Supreme Court, what they do, how cases reach them, and why they matter. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow the podcast, leave a review, and share it with someone learning English or just trying to understand the U.S. government better. Thanks for listening.